Good evening, Stephanie. It's so nice to see you.
Hey, how are you?
I'm so happy that you have some time to talk to me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story with us. Let me begin with by reading your bio and a brief introduction about the project, okay?
All right.
Dr. Stephanie Baker grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland, in a Latino immigrant family and a single parent household. She now lives with her husband in Los Angeles. Her childhood experiences exposed her to health disparities in low-income communities, especially the Latino immigrant community. This led her to dream of becoming a community doctor, working with low-income immigrant communities. Dr. Baker is bilingual and bicultural, having spent part of her childhood in her mother's home country of Guatemala. Baker attended Montgomery College from 2008 to 2010. She earned a master's degree in biology at UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and a master's degree in medical sciences at Loma Linda University in Southern California. After a long journey and struggles to overcome a learning disability, Dr. Baker earned her medical degree at Loma Linda. Dr. Baker is now a family medicine resident at Harbor UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles, where she works with low-income and immigrant communities. Dr. Baker will share her story of her educational journey at MC and explain how her experience of growing up between cultures led her to a fulfilling career in medicine. Thank you so much for telling me this story. I think it's very important. As you know, my name is Heather Bruce Satrum, and I teach an ELAP, English Language for Academic Purposes, at Montgomery College. This project is called History in the Making, documenting stories of immigrant and refugee students at Montgomery College. The goal is to help others better understand the experiences of immigrants and immigrant families. And telling your story will enable others to better understand the challenges that immigrants experience and better appreciate the resilience and perseverance of people in your community. So I'm grateful for your participation. You had a chance to read the questions in advance, but please note that all of the questions are optional. If you want to skip a question, that's fine. If you need to take a break, that's also fine. And we'll take about an hour for our conversation. Today is Tuesday, April 25th, 2023. Could you please tell me your full name?
Stephanie Baker.
Do I have permission to record this interview?
Yes.
Where do you live now and what kind of work do you do?
I currently live in LA, Los Angeles, California, and I'm a second-year family medicine resident at Harbor UCLA.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
When were you a student at Montgomery College?
I was there from fall 2008, well, it's a very long time, to fall of 2010, and where I earned an associate's degree.
What was your associate's degree in?
To be honest, don't remember. I think it was something to do about medical sciences.
Okay. And why did you choose to go to Montgomery College?
At the time, my parents were divorced. There was no money in the household. And so for me, it was a stepping stone. My only entryway to go into a four-year school. I didn't have the money to afford a four-year school, but I could afford Montgomery College. And so for me, it was basically my opportunity to go to college.
And I believe one of your siblings also attended Montgomery College, is that right?
Yeah, my younger brother attended for some time, about a year after, started a year after I did.
Okay. I would love for you to share your story because I think it's important to share the story of someone who is bicultural and bilingual. And I know you were born in the United States, but you had the opportunity to live in your mother's home country of Guatemala. Were you born in Tacoma Park, Maryland?
Yes, I was born in the Adventist hospital here.
And so tell me a little bit about your experience growing up in Tacoma Park, Maryland, and your experience then discovering or learning more about your mother's home country.
Okay, so a little bit about at the time, it was kind of going when I was growing up, about the decade it was changing from a mostly predominantly Caucasian, older neighborhood to more of a Latino neighborhood. Now it's mostly Latinos. And I think some of the people who are there now are other immigrant peoples from like other countries, like African countries and everything. So it's the neighborhood's changed a little bit. Most of the time where I lived was about a mile away from Langley Park. And I think it's pronounced Langley Park, but coming from where growing up how I did, it's Langley Park for us. And so I just always have to make that correction.
So, wait, that's interesting. So I call it Langley Park. What did you call it?
Langley Park. There's no L, it's an R instead. So
that's fascinating. I had never heard that. Very interesting. Okay.
And so there, my dad was, so growing up, the beginning of my childhood, I lived with both of my parents and my two younger siblings. My dad was a maintenance worker at HHMI, Howard Hughes Medical Institute. He did the maintenance there, fixed stuff and everything. And on the weekends, he would do odd end jobs for extra income. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and then sometime around the time where I turned 9, she had a daycare that she had throughout the rest of my childhood and adolescence. And
so your father was originally from Ecuador, is that right?
Yeah.
But do you identify more with your mother's culture?
Yeah, I spent a lot more time in Guatemala. So during the summers, not every summer, but at least every other or most of them, we would go to Guatemala for 2 months. And my mom thought she wanted us to learn how to speak Spanish. So not only did we have the rule, there was no English allowed in the house. All of our Disney movies were in Spanish, but she would send us to Guatemala during summer, enroll us in school. So we would have to be forced to learn how to read and write, and how kind of like the culture, like our culture, we would be with the kids from the school, see their life experiences, participate in school activities, see how it was in Guatemala and how it was different from here. So that was, I think, something that really shaped my thought process, like who I am now. So having spent, not only did I go to school in Guatemala officially, but spending the summers there kind of helped me become part of the culture and incorporate into more of my culture as compared to Ecuadorian culture. My dad wasn't there the whole time, and I spent a lot less time in Ecuador, and we didn't really spend time with people our age. So a lot of the slang, the TV shows, the games and stuff, the snacks, I grew up with all of that. So I'm able to relate to people who would have grown up there because of that. So I think that's one of the things that makes me more Guatemalan than Ecuadorian.
When you were growing up in your home, did you speak Spanish with your siblings and your parents?
Yes. And after coming back and in high school, especially after I came back from boarding school, a lot of my friends were Latinos from like different countries. So a lot of the time we didn't speak in English, even in high school in the United States. Some of them didn't speak English, so we would all speak in Spanish. So I did grow up speaking a lot of it Spanish.
Interesting. Did you start your education with Montgomery County Public Schools, like in elementary school?
No, I was very, very blessed where my mom believed in Adventist education. And so she put us through private school, Adventist schools from kindergarten, at least me, kindergarten to 8th grade. And so I feel that's one of the areas where I was very privileged. And then I went to Northwood High School for high school, right when it was reopening back in 2008 or 2004.
Did you go to, what was the name of your K through 8 school?
Beltsville Seventh-day Adventist.
Okay. No, it's interesting that Tacoma Park has a long history of being an Adventist. It was founded by Adventists. And did your mom choose Tacoma Park for that reason, this community?
Well, I think it's just, actually, my mom didn't choose a community we grew up in. So my house is down the street, 1 mile away from the Adventist hospital there. And it's the closest hospital to our house. It's either that one or the Catholic one. I forgot the name right now.
Holy Cross?
Yes, Holy Cross. And so that is actually the Adventist one, I think, is the closest one. My dad bought the house before he married my mom. And so my dad, who's not Adventist at all, was the one who chose it. We tried going to the Adventist schools there, but I think my mom liked Beltsville more. So we ended up driving 15 minutes all the way up to Beltsville.
So typically, would you speak Spanish at home and then English in school in the K through 8 experience?
Yeah.
And then in high school, you had a circle of Latina friends. So you would speak Spanish with them, but English in the classroom?
English with my teachers. I would communicate when necessary, but for the most part, there was a period where I mostly spoke only Spanish.
How was the transition from a religious K through 8 school to Northwood High School? What was that like?
I don't know. I mean, we grew up with a lot of kids who weren't Adventist, a lot of our network. So even though we had two networks, we had the Adventist network and the Central American network. And so a lot of the people from my Central American network didn't go to private schools. They went to public schools. And so people were very similar to them. And so it wasn't that we had been exposed to both.
But I mean, in terms of the academics, did you feel like you were well prepared for high school at Northwood? Did you feel like the transition was pretty smooth in terms of success in your classes and that sort of thing?
I feel that because my mom pushed Adventist education in us up to 8th grade, the quality of my education was a lot better. And so some of the stuff I did in middle school, I didn't see until college or AP courses. So I feel like it gave me more of an advantage, which hurt me. It helped me through high school and part of college. It did hurt me in the sense that school was very easy for me. And so I think it helped hide some of my ADHD and kind of helped delay my diagnosis in a way, because I was really good in school. I was doing good grades. And so and a lot of this stuff I had already done for some of even like my microbiology course at Montgomery College. It was super easy for me because I did all of that in middle school. So I knew the stuff. I didn't have to study as much. And so I think that's where some of my, it hurt me with some developing certain study skills and then getting diagnosed earlier.
We'll come back to the story about being diagnosed with ADHD in a little bit, but first, could you tell me about when you went to boarding school in Guatemala? Can you tell me about that experience?
Oh yeah, that was like one of the best years of my life. It was amazing. It was scary because a completely new language, didn't know anybody, and we were in the middle of a rainforest in the middle of nowhere.
Where in Guatemala were you?
It was in Poptun, Petén. So it was about 5 hours away from Tikal, which is a huge Mayan ruins.
I've been to Tikal. I've been to the pyramids there.
So
beautiful.
It's in the same area, same department or state, but closer to the city. For me, it was amazing. Definitely school there is a little bit different than the United States, how they did things. I made a lot of friends, and some of them I still talk to today.
Do you want to talk about some of your friendships from that time?
The main one that stuck is Anna Lee, who still was my best friend in boarding school and still is. I still talk to her husband. I mean, they met he's her husband. And then some of her husband's friend group were in Maryland during the time I was in college. So we did get together a couple times. So yeah, I still have some of my friends from there.
So you spent 1 year at this boarding school, is that right? Which grade in high school?
Second half of freshman year and first half of sophomore year.
Was it difficult to return back to the American system after that?
No, it was just frustrating because I started in the middle of the year. The classes that were available for me weren't my favorite classes. So that's where it was a little bit difficult.
There are many advantages to being bicultural and bilingual, and there are also some challenges associated with that. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the advantages are?
Yeah, I can talk about some of the advantages. Well, some of the advantages are, oh my goodness. Sorry, I have my notes. Okay. So some of the languages, the advantages are the language. I speak two languages, which makes me able to communicate with a lot more people. I'm able to move between different worlds because I had to always be switching from the American culture and my own culture. When I am in different, trying to buy a new culture, I'm able to adapt a lot better. I'm already used to it. And for me, it just also allows me to escape from the professional world. For me, especially while I was in medical school, going dancing, the food, the telenovelas. And then it also allows me, for at least now with my patients, it allows me to build a different connection. A lot of the times I wear a quetzal, a keychain on with my keys, with my badge. And so if you're Guatemalan, you see the quetzal, you know I'm Guatemalan. And so when my patients see that, I see their smile. And then there are some patients where sometimes it's hard to schedule for the same provider. And so sometimes my patients are put in with a different provider. And I've gotten messages from my co-residents, oh, patient didn't want to see me. They canceled their appointment because they want to talk to the Guatemalan doctor. And so stuff like that. And it's not just with me, with my other Guatemalan co-residents, we joke about it. And even with the other Latinos, my program has a lot of Latinos. And so a lot of the times they get really happy and only want to work with, they're like, oh yeah, I want somebody who speaks Spanish, and I'm able to do that. And then in the way I treat my patients and the way I give my advice, I do take cultural context into account. And I feel that has made a difference in their care and the quality of care. And so it's something that, I don't know, those are some of the benefits about it.
You have an insight into Latino culture and so you're able to speak in Spanish with your patients. I think in an earlier conversation we had, you talked about your insight into nutrition, for example. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, about your understanding of, like, if you're meeting with a patient who maybe needs advice related to nutrition or diet, how does your knowledge of culture help you that way?
Well, for example, so my culture is Guatemalan. And so one of the things I like to do in my personal life is cook our traditional dishes, but I try to make healthy substitutes. For example, some of our dishes have our enchiladas, which is nothing like the Mexican enchiladas, is a flat tortilla, like kind of like a large tortilla chip with stuff piled up. So it requires ground beef. But I've already tried it with ground turkey and you can't tell the differences. My tias don't know the difference. I can tell my patients, I'm like, yeah, you know, you're trying to eat healthy. Some of the tweaks you can do is use ground turkey, ground chicken instead of ground beef. Trust me, nobody knows the difference. Stuff like that. Or I already know, I'm like, you know, in our culture, sometimes we'll eat like tortillas and then queso en crema. And I'm like, you know, I want to eat one tortilla, queso and crema, try to pick one and make sure it's a small portion. So like things like this, when I give the advice, and then even with our conversation, sometimes neither of us can find the word in English, but we can just swap, especially with my patients that are bilingual. Sometimes they want to speak in Spanish, sometimes they want to speak in English, and sometimes we speak in both languages. And it's just a matter, we switch languages depending on how we can express ourselves and explain something better, a thought, an idea, better. So that's something that has made a huge difference.
I love that. I think that's a really nice concrete example of how your knowledge is beneficial to you in your profession and beneficial to your patients. I think something that I would love to explore with you is related to the challenges that you had related to ADHD. And I understand that you were not diagnosed until you were already in medical school. Is that right?
Yes. So I got diagnosed with ADHD in my first time going through second year. So my dean suspected it in the middle of first year, but at that time, they just told me there was a wait list and I would have to wait. And so it wasn't until my second, and I struggled a lot during first year, struggled a lot during the first part of my second year. And for me, I went to teachers, I asked for help, I got help with testing. I had tutors, I asked my friends what they were doing. and I couldn't figure out why it wasn't clicking. So finally, in the middle, towards the second, it was towards the middle, but the second half of my first time going through second year, where I got the test, and lo and behold, I have both the hyperactivity and the inattention. So I didn't get one type, I got both. So that was a lot of fun. So I started, but by that time I had already suspected it. And so even though it was a little bit too late for me to pass the year, I had spent the last few weeks kind of like, I probably have ADHD. So looking through different tweaks and different study techniques to kind of help me a little bit. And so using a combination of different study techniques, specific study environment. And during medical school, I did need take Adderall to help me study. That kind of helped me finish medical school. But even then, testing was still something that I really struggled with. And so even going through with talking with my professors, trying to use all the usual study techniques and testing techniques, something wasn't clicking. And so with my husband and I, we did a lot of research in what would make a good environment, what type of different study techniques, and then testing and how to connect how the ADHD brain works. And so I was able to connect my studying with how my brain works, so that when I did do a standardized test, I knew how to do it. I was able to answer questions better, and I was able to finish medical school and do pretty well. But a lot of that went through research, working with my husband, asking for help, and going through there's different lists of things like tips for adults with ADHD. So going through that is what helped me get through medical school.
You mentioned you were on a wait list. Was that a wait list to get tested for learning differences?
Yeah, that's what they told me. But when I was about to fail second year, they were like, here, take the test. So I don't know if it was an actual wait list or they just made me wait, but it took, I had a year.
So your struggles led to a year delay in your medical school process, approximately?
Yeah.
Were you able to were there resources at your medical school to help students with learning differences?
There were tutors. There was one specialist that the school would send us to, but my experience with that specific specialist wasn't very good. During one of her sessions, she told me I was not smart enough for medical school and that I should quit, at which I just got up and left and never went back to her again. A lot of people swear by her, and most of the people have had very good experiences with her. For me, it was not the case. And that was basically the only resource that they had. And then working with the professors one-on-one. I would make appointments and work with them. So there wasn't really that many resources.
I imagine that since you were so successful academically for a very long time, that it was incredibly frustrating for you when you started to struggle academically. Like emotionally, it must have been quite challenging for you.
Yes and no. Because my undergrad grades weren't the best either. And I thought it was because I was working a lot. I didn't realize it was because of a learning disability. So for me, grades were something that were harder. It was hard for me to go through in college, and because I was used to high school and middle school, I wouldn't really study. I would get the A's. In certain classes, college classes, I wouldn't study. I would get the A's, and it was just, yeah, of course I got an A. But getting into the not doing so well and in science classes, which were my strength, was hard. And so in undergrad and in graduate school, I was like, oh, it's because I'm working. It's just one of those things that I have to work so I can go to school and pay for school. So it's just one of the hits I have to take. In medical school, it was just more of I'm not working. What's wrong? So it was a little bit of imposter syndrome there, and was like, oh, am I good enough for this? Am I smart enough? So it was a little bit of everything.
Being told you said you were told that you weren't smart enough to succeed, and you knew inside that that was not true, and you proved them wrong. Um, could you talk a little bit about when you've had obstacles in your life like that, having to retake a year of medical school, or being told you weren't smart enough, or being perceived as not being good enough? What do you do to help yourself, or what did you do when you faced those obstacles? What helped give you the strength to persevere despite those obstacles?
Well, I think for me, my biggest strength was God. I am a Christian, and so I firmly believe that God had plans for me. And based on the way things were going with my life, I felt that his plan was for me to do medicine and finish medicine. And so I didn't think that he would have allowed me to get into medical school just to fail out. And so I knew that even though it was hard and it was going to require a lot of work, I knew that I was going to be able to finish. Even though a lot of the times it took a lot to remember that, and I would have to have a lot of people remind me that, you're going to finish. Second was, especially during medical school, it was my husband. He's always been my strongest support system. My biggest team player, who would patiently help me look stuff up, ask people. And then even when I was being hard-headed, reminded me that I was being hard-headed and I should try this. And then before medical school, I did have my Maryland village, my lab members who would listen to me crying, read all my applications, brainstorm with me on how to word things. California, my med school family who were supportive, listened to my crying, helped me study, quiz me on their days off, because I did repeat a year. And I did do a biomed year, like the master's in medical sciences here. So my original class graduated 2 years before me. And so when they were in third and fourth years, I had friends that on their days off would go to my house and help me study, quiz me and be like, no, Stephanie, you should do this. So it was a little bit of a strong, it took multiple villages. And then remembering my why. And that was, there was a documentary about a clinic in Philadelphia for underserved communities. And so when things would get hard, I would watch the documentary and be like, this is the reason why you're doing this. You want to work with underserved populations, immigrant populations. And so you can't do it if you don't finish. So those are my 4 main sources.
I love that. What was the name of the documentary that you watched?
Clínica del Pueblo, I think that's what it was.
The People's Clinic.
Yeah, it's been a while. And that one I watched mostly during my second year of medical school.
Interesting. Yeah. I think I'd like to know more about how you became interested in medicine. Were there any sicknesses in your family or any experiences with illness that made you particularly drawn to working in medicine?
No, actually, it was my curiosity. So when I was very little, I was 5 years old. I was like around when I was like, I knew I wanted to be a doctor when I was like around 5 years old. I was very curious in how I looked inside. And so because my dad worked at Howard Hughes Medical Institute as a janitor, a lot of the times I would throw away old anatomy textbooks. And there was this one mannequin with all the organs and everything that they threw out. And he asked if he could bring it to me. And so I was fascinated by flipping through the books, playing with, it was one of like the little mannequin thingies where you put the organs on and out. And then my mom would always buy me books, the children's books that show you how you are and what's the inside of things. And so she would give me stuff about the human body. And so that's what sparked my curiosity.
I love that story.
Yeah.
It's nice to think about, books that influence you, like when you're a child, and how they can later affect your goals. I think that's a beautiful story. I know you need to pause for a minute, so I'm going to stop recording and then we'll come back in just a minute.
Okay, sounds good.